saved you a seat. Oh, all right. Video.
Well, thank you everybody for showing. That was our World War I overture.
Cool.
My name's Bo Crane. I'm with the Menlo Park Historical Association. There's several Historical Association members present, and we got the permit for this event, and this is by default Menlo Park's celebration of the 100th anniversary of Armistice Day, as well as the 80th anniversary of the creation of Fremont Park. And we're going to give you some talks on about the history. Barbara Wilcox, who wrote the story of Camp Fremont, is going to talk about the camp. Mike Demeter is going to talk about a speech that appeared in the newspaper in 1938, 80 years ago. That was an event that was attended by was led off by the mayor of Menlo Park at that time, and we have the current mayor with us today. He's going to speak a few words first, then Barbara, then Mike, and then I'm going to talk about how a German immigrant created the Fremont Park. So you've all been very patient, so we'll get started right away. Before Barbara talks, the Menlo Park Historical has the Streets of Menlo Park. If people have not bought that already, we're having a special in lieu of 1918. We're going to sell it for $18, but we don't want to make change, so actually it'll be 20. But you can buy this, and all proceeds go to the Menlo Park Historical Association. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to Barbara, Peter Otake, the current mayor of Menlo Park. We're not going to have the Pledge of Allegiance because we know we're all very allegiant people.
Allegiant people.
Thank you.
So don't have to take a knee.
Thank you, Bo, and good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Otake. I'm honored to serve as mayor of Menlo Park this year, and thank you for inviting me. This is one of my last formal events as mayor. I also wanted to recognize some of the other council members. That's Vice Mayor Ray Mueller standing in back, and I think if the results hold, some new incoming council members, Drew right over there, Cecilia Taylor here, welcome, and appreciate your being here today. So, Armistice Day. It was originally to commemorate the war to end all wars. If you all may remember from history, World War I really started in 1914, and at the time Europe was split among many large countries, and there was something called a balance of power between them, which was supposed to hold the peace among the different countries. So there was Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, there was Britain and France and Russia and the Ottoman Empire, and they all were roughly similar in size and power at the time, and that was supposed to hold the peace. But in August of 1914, because of the alliances that had been set up among them, very quickly Europe became embroiled in a very deadly war, trench war that went on for several years. America came into it on the later side in 1917. And so certainly, as we know, and we'll talk about with the history of Camp Fremont, at the time that was this far off war, And Menlo Park was certainly a very quiet community with probably under 3,000 residents, very rural. And all of a sudden this camp was set up with, at its peak, 30,000 soldiers. And the soldiers trained here. What many may not also know was in 1918, what also took place was the worldwide Spanish flu that took place. And so almost 10% of the soldiers here, obviously with the base camp where you had all of these soldiers training together, it meant that the flu spread fairly quickly. About 3,000 soldiers had to go to the infirmary. That's probably why we had a pretty large hospital that got set up here on Camp Fremont. And ultimately 147 soldiers passed away from the Spanish flu. And that was also in 1918, and most people don't know about that. But again, this was the war to end all wars, and it turned out not to be. And as we know, then some of the seeds from World War I led to World War II, and we now recognize not just the armistice that ended World War I, but we now commemorate Veterans Day in honor of all of the veterans that have served this great country to keep us safe and to keep us free. And I thank all of you who have served in our armed forces. We appreciate your service, and we recognize your service, and thank you today on what's now Veterans Day. So, with that, so I think I turn it over to Barbara.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mayor Otake, for that kind introduction. Am I on mic?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here in the smoke from the awful fires. And when we thank our veterans and our service members, past and future and current, I hope we can also take a moment to thank and honor the firefighters and the public safety workers who are offering their lives today to help save California. I'm thrilled that the city of Menlo Park is honoring the centennial of the armistice, which was 100 years ago today, as our mayor said. The war was long ago, and it was far away to most Americans, both geographically and cognitively. They had no idea what was going on. We entered late, and only about half our troops actually made it to France before the war ended. That includes the troops who trained right here in San Mateo County at Camp Fremont, which was a large installation, almost 70,000 acres counting the maneuver grounds, but it was headquartered right here in downtown Menlo Park. And because the camp was right here, we experienced the war in an unusually direct and personal way. Camp Fremont doubled the population of San Mateo County for the year or so it was in operation, 1917-18. Its artillery range was what is on now Stanford's Dish Hill. And its trench maneuver ground was where SLAC, the accelerator, is now. And every once in a while we do find UXOs from the World War I operations there in the foothills. Where we're standing now, or sitting, wasn't nearly so exciting back then. It was, present-day Fremont Park was basically the corporation yard for the Army 8th Division headquarters, which were, I think, a little bit to the east. So there were motor vehicles parked here. This wouldn't have seemed terribly mundane at the time, because only a few years earlier those motor vehicles would have been horses. Motorized transport in 1917 was fairly new, especially commercial motorized transport was new and progressive. And after the war, Camp Fremont surplus was offered to veterans first, and all the young junior officers wanted the cars. The Army 8th Division was formed at Camp Fremont, and it served our country for decades until its inactivation in
Should be
1992.
a little louder.
I wrote a book about all of this for my master's thesis at Stanford. You can get it at Village Stationers, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any place books about history are sold. Very few Camp Fremont buildings survive. They include the late and lamented Oasis, which was a YMCA, MacArthur Park over in Palo Alto, which was originally right across the street. It was the camp's hostess house, where visiting women, relatives of soldiers, could meet with their soldiers in camp. And then there are two buildings at the VA in Menlo Park, which started out life as Camp Fremont's base hospital. But Camp Fremont changed our county, and it changed our peninsula in subtle ways. In terms of land use, it brought sewers to Menlo Park and enabled the town to develop, because we did not have soil that would perk sufficient for small lot development, and so we needed sewerage. And there was not in that day mechanisms like Mellow Roofs that would enable developers to pass infrastructure costs on to future home buyers. So the Army, they were very happy to bring in the Army because they understood that the Army would bring in sewerage. And that was a key reason why developers in Menlo Park wanted the camp here. Camp Fremont made other areas in the peninsula less attractive to developers. For example, the Palo Alto foothills, where those UXOs still occasionally turn up today. But most of all, Camp Fremont made San Mateo County and the peninsula think and feel modern, part of a global effort. It gave people a glimpse of a future with modern health care, vaccination, sewers, electric streetlights, universal literacy, because the men in camp who couldn't read were given basic lessons sufficient to make them function as soldiers. A system and a society in which new immigrants, long-time members of American-born families would all work together to solve basic societal problems. And it gave Camp Fremont people a sense of being global citizens, although through the negative example of sending men to war. This was America's first global war, and it was America's first draft since the Civil War. I have to mention that about 1 in 7 draftees went AWOL, or just failed to show up. There was no government mechanism then to get men actually to show up in induction. Peer pressure, you would hear about slacker rates like you did in the Civil War. Government was very small, and so the whole effort depended on people feeling that this was the thing to do to help save democracy and to help improve their country back home. So the men and women who served were motivated to make the world better. They thought, and we can tell this from their letters, that old people and the old order had screwed everything up and it was up to them to save it. Lessons for today. They believed the war would bring the social improvements I've mentioned, better living at home through the government's investment in camps, and democracy throughout the world through Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, which were a mission statement for world democratic government. So let's talk about those motivated young men and women who served. There were 4 million under arms at war's end. About half made it overseas. About 57,000 Americans died. This was the first war in which disease ran about neck and neck with combat fatalities, because healthcare was improving, partly as a result of things learned in the war. Many of these people died in the 1918 flu epidemic, as Mayor Otake said, which spread, the epidemic spread in war conditions. And they included a Camp Fremont lieutenant who laid out the ground for the 319th Engineer Regiment off of Grove Avenue. And he left a wife and infant son whom he'd seen for only a few minutes earlier in 1918 on leave. An example of the kind of sacrifices people made. There were many other heroes. Let's mention 2. Major Maud Campbell Davidson came to Camp Fremont in June 1918 as a brand new Army nurse, but she left soon after that to go to Letterman in San Francisco, which was the largest Army medical center in the West and I think maybe in the country. She is known principally for her valor in World War II, when she led the 67 nurses captured in May 1942 on Batana-Creditor. She had backbone. She lost half her body weight, but she brought everyone under her command home, every single person. The film So Proudly We Hail tells Major Davison's story. It was released in 1943 to help motivate that wartime public when her nurses were still in captivity. And Claudette Colbert plays her in the movie. It's a great movie. Another hero. Corporal Harold Roberts was born in Noe Valley in San Francisco, and he dropped out of UC Berkeley to enlist. He served in the 15th Cavalry, which spent a couple of months at Camp Fremont, no more than 5 months, before in training for the East Coast in early 1918. He himself was deployed in the Philippines. He volunteered for the Tank Corps. And tanks, as I said, when motorized transport, very new. Tanks, super new. It was like, Bitcoin. I mean, it was super new and progressive. He drove a tank in the Meuse-Argonne, one of America's 2 big battles, and was drowned in an ambush because the Germans had learned to repurpose shell holes as ambushes for these very new and unstable tanks. And as they were sinking, he told his gunner, "There's only room for one of us to get out," and out you go. Corporal Roberts posthumously received the Medal of Honor, one of 7 San Franciscans to receive the Medal of Honor in World War I. He was very famous after the war because his example was used to raise money for victory bonds. Today in Central California, Camp Roberts is named after him. It was the first Army installation to be named after an enlisted man. All the rest are named after officers. The Army nurses who served here and overseas were very brave. Here at Camp Fremont's base hospital, as Mayor Otake said, they saved lives during the flu epidemic. There was no, many times the flu developed into pneumonia. There were no antibiotics. What saved your life was skilled nursing treatment to keep you hydrated, to keep your temperature down. They would pack you in ice to keep your temperature down. So you needed critical care nursing, and that was your best hope. And they saved at the Army Hospital not just soldiers, but civilians, mostly young people, often from Stanford, owe their lives to this hospital. I'll let one nurse named Muriel Hamilton here at Camp Fremont, whose letters are saved in the Menlo Park Association archives, to explain why she did it, why she served. She wrote, "So far as the danger is concerned, it gives you the creeps to think that you might never come home, and also that you might come home less than a wreck. But one can't think long of these things, and after all, what is life anyhow? There's an awful lot of living that I don't call life." These Camp Fremont men and women benefited themselves and us. They received valuable training in healthcare, engineering, mapping, surveying, that put them in position to develop the West just as the West was poised to develop with the advent of the private car in the 1920s. At least 150 of the camp's 319 Engineer Regiment, formed again here at Camp Fremont, settled in the Bay Area after the war. And they built many major projects, including Treasure Island, the Alcan Highway linking Alaska to the contiguous United States, Union Station in Los Angeles. They supervised petroleum exploration in Southern California, again enabling the proliferation of the private public automobile. These men and women were very grateful to Camp Fremont because later in life they recognized the opportunity that they had been given. And they donated their papers to the Menlo Park Historical Association, where they're a valuable historical resource. And I was the first person to publish many of these resources and these letters, which had never been published before. I'll close with the words of an anonymous officer in Camp Fremont's 12th Infantry. Again, to explain his mission, or what he thought of as his mission 100 years ago. Quote, To make over the boys of a peaceful nation into warlike men was impossible, according to the German High Command. Had the enemy taken into consideration the thoughts and the ideals of the American people, and not merely their own psychological theories, they might have come to a different conclusion. These brains did not conceive the spirit and the inconceivable something which lives in the breasts and the hearts of Americans. We must carry on. In the tumult and carnage of battle, as did our brave brothers. In the furrowed fields and busy marts of a land blessed by peace, we must keep aglow the altar fires of freedom and democracy. Thank you all for honoring his legacy today. I'll close with a moment of silence for our lost veterans. Thank you very much for honoring their legacy today. And I introduce Michael, who will tell you more about how Camp Fremont Park came to be.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Michael Demeter, Vice President of the Menlo Park Historical Association. Fremont Park, or more specifically, Camp Fremont Memorial Park, was dedicated on Armistice Day, 1938, the year before I was born in Menlo Park. On November the 11th, 1938, Fremont Park was dedicated. Speeches were given by several dignitaries, including Menlo Park Mayor James Cooper, former President Herbert Hoover, who had lost the 32 election to FDR, and former U.S. Senator Samuel S. Shortridge, previously a Menlo Park resident, but then living in Atherton. The Menlo Park Recorder that day led off with an editorial by Raymond Pitcairn, a 53-year-old Pennsylvania attorney. I've been asked to read to you this editorial. I think you'll find, as I did, that not much has changed in 80 years since the dedication of the park. Now remember, this was done in 1938, so there's some archaic language in here, but you just have to use your brains to adjust for it today. This is his remarks. At the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, where rises the undying flame, at the Cenopath in London, where black-veiled women weep, at the Memorial Amphitheater in Arlington, where sleeps our unknown soldier. For again, we observe Armistice Day. This year, on its 20th anniversary, again we honor the men who died in hope that they were making a world a happier place in which to live. To the young, this celebration may mean little or much, but to the millions of older men, it brings each year more poignant emotions. Not only recollections of gay and sturdy comrades who now sleep in honored graves, not only disappointment because a brave new world which was derived from the ashes of Holocaust failed. But deeper still, a sense of loss and disenchantment, when the high courage and high idealism that marked those days is compared to the attitude of many of our leaders today. Then the men in high places preached a united nation, pressing onward to great and noble ends. Now too many of them preach a message of group and class hatred. Then we were told that it was our duty and privilege of citizens to loyally aid and support the nation. Now from countless political platforms we hear the reverse, that people should expect the nation to support them. Then men strove for leadership on the basis of what they could do for America. Now, too many of them speak only what they can get for their political supporters. Undoubtedly, these attitudes are temporary. Only the body of the unknown soldier is dead and buried. The spirit there represented is eternal. And if this year's celebration serves to bring that spirit more actively into our national life, if the observance recalls to men in high places or law the exaltation that comes with true cooperation towards a noble end, then Armistice Day will again have served its great and patriotic purpose. That was the article that the readers of the Menlo Park Recorder, our local paper at the time, read that day. Now I'd like all veterans among us to please stand and be recognized. Any veterans? Thank you. Please resume your seats. Now, anyone who had a parent, a grandparent, or great-grandparent who served in World War I, please stand. You may be likely to be here because of the armistice that caused a lot of young men to be spared. Thank you. Next on our agenda, I'm going to call for Bo Crane. I might add to Bo, who's not only the author of the Feast of Menlo Park, he's the one that did the major planning for this event.
Hey, bravo!
Yeah, thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Mike. I should note that just a few minutes ago was the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, and that's when the armistice was created in France. Of course, it's not that time here, but that's when it was then. A lot of people have put a lot of effort to make this happen, and that includes Jim Lewis, who had these storyboards. He's our president. He has worked for a year to get the storyboards put in. Were put in Friday, the last minute, thanks to the efforts of
11th hour.
Derek Swigert, the Menlo Park staff.
11th.
And when we're
Well
done,
put.
you can walk around there at the corner of where the stoplight is. So I'm going to, and also Jim Clendenin, our former president. He represented us with the Menlo, the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors. We have a proclamation that basically is the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I. I won't read it because I have my own stuff to read. But Jim appeared and got the proclamation. I should say that Camp Fremont was not the only camp. If people wonder, there were several other camps. In fact, there were 30 across the country, and they were also named for military figures, which was John Fremont was California's, but there was a camp in Washington named for Meriwether Lewis, a camp in Southern California named for General Stephen Kearny, a Camp Cody in New Mexico because Buffalo Bill Cody had just died. Texas had camps Bowie and Travis, Alamo Heroes. It also had a Camp MacArthur named for Arthur MacArthur Jr., the father of Douglas MacArthur. Illinois had a Camp Grant. Ohio had a Camp Sherman. Michigan had a Camp Custer. Virginia had a Camp Lee. Maryland had a Camp Meade. And Alabama had camps McClellan and Sheridan, of all things. They weren't very well thought of in Alabama, but that's where the camps were. So our camp was, as Barbara pointed out, created in 1917, 1918, but the park was created 20 years later. As Mike read, and that's where the article came in the paper. So Jacob Frederick Carl Hagens, and whenever you have two middle names, you know you're important. But Jacob Frederick Carl Hagens, a San Francisco corporate executive, in the 1930s was key to the creation of Camp Fremont, where we are today. When Mr. Higgins discovered that the vacant lot on the corner was to be used for commercial purposes, he tried to get the city to purchase the property. When the city failed to do so, Higgins formed a private group to buy the land, putting up most of the funds himself. Higgins was born in 1870 in Germany, in Bremen, a port on the River Weser. At age 16, he sailed from Germany to the Kingdom of Hawaii, where immigrant Germans had taken prominent positions in the government and as sugar planters. The year he arrived, 1887, the Hawaiian king was overthrown by those in the government and military, establishing a constitution with a limited monarchy. The national anthem, now the state song, was rearranged by a German band leader based on a Prussian anthem. So even though the United States was fighting Germany ultimately, this camp had a German background. In 1890, Higgins married Eliza Kaipulimano Hugo, 20, born in Hawaii. The Hawaiian Kingdom continued in political turmoil until it became a U.S. territory in 1898. During the Great War, Higgins, 48, served as a U.S. Army major in the Quartermaster Corps. In the 1910 census, the couple was living in Honolulu. In 1920, Jacob and his wife were in San Francisco, living with their niece, Kaloha Kekeli, now 24, and also Jacob's niece, 11. Jacob, with a high school education, soon became the president of Great Western Electrochemical Company, whose president had been Mortimer Fleischacker of the well-known San Francisco family. His brother Herbert founded the San Francisco Zoo. Also living in San Francisco was Jacob's younger brother Henry, who'd been living in Hilo, Hawaii with his wife Maria Beatrice, born in Mexico. Jacob and Henry are also listed as the principals of Higgins and Company. In the 1930s, household included Kealoha Francis, that's Jacob's niece, and his two nephews from Germany, ages 19 and 18, serving as clerks, likely in his business. Higgins is listed at 984 Santa Cruz Avenue in the 1932 directory, which was across the street from this vacant corner lot. When he retired in 1938, his company merged with Dow Chemical. Fremont Park was dedicated on November 11th that year, 80 years ago, 20 years after the armistice was signed, ending the hostilities. Jacob also gifted Menlo Park a library, I guess he was before Arriaga's effort, and allowed part of a building he owned to be used as a city hall. He was the largest donor in town to the Red Cross. His wife died June 26, 1940, and he died a little over 7 months later, in February 8, 1941. Their home, across the street from Fremont Park, was valued at $15,000. It's now part of the Menlo Church, which was built in 1950. The couple are both interred at Cypress Lawn in Colma. With his wife passed and without children, Jacob left an estate of $500,000 to his niece, 53, with the trust paying her $9,000 a month. He also left $2,000 to a former secretary, $500 to his chauffeur, and some property to a former employee. Other survivors include his sister and two brothers still living in Germany. So the whole point of this is that here was a German immigrant who has created this acre where we are today. After selling the house property to the Presbyterian Church, his niece moved to 561 Center Drive in Palo Alto, where she lived till her death in 1969, 9 days before Neil Armstrong and his crew landed on the moon. So the story begins of this park with a teenage boy leaving the German Empire for the Kingdom of Hawaii. He served in the Army during the Great War and saw to it that this corner of Menlo Park was dedicated to those troops who enlisted to join the nation's fight. So thank you all. Please stroll around the park. Enjoy this park. It's Menlo Park. It's our town.
He also maintained
And thank you for
a
appearing.
nice view from his house.
That's it.